call the meeting to order. Ask you to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Tonight's consent agenda consists of the following items. Item A, Resolution R-2342, adopt to accept a donation to be dedicated towards the 2023 Winsted Night Out event. Item B, adopt Resolution R-23-43 to accept donations to be dedicated towards the 2023 Winsted Volunteer Fire Department Capital Equipment Fund. Item C, reschedule the City Council work session and City Council meeting scheduled for Tuesday, November 7th to Wednesday, November 8th at 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. due to the school district ISD 2687 election on November 7th. Item D, authorize the city administrator to initiate the renewal process with Southwest Central Services Cooperative and Medica to provide health insurance coverage for the City of Winston employees for the policy beginning January 1st of 2024. Item E, authorize the city administrator to initiate renewal process with Southwest West Central Service Cooperative and Delta Dental of Minnesota to provide dental insurance coverage for the City of Winston employees for the policy beginning January 1st, 2024. Item F, authorize the city administrator to initiate the renewal process with the Hartford to provide ancillary insurance coverage for City of Winston employees for the policy beginning January 1st, 2024. Item G, appoint Ms. Lori Quast to the position of volunteer firefighter with the Winston Volunteer Fire Department. Item H, appoint Mr. Jason Quast to the position of volunteer firefighter with the Winston Volunteer Fire Department, contingent upon passing a criminal background check and pre-employment physical and a drug and alcohol test. The last one is the claims list. Approve the claims list for October 3rd, 2023. That's consent agenda. I'm looking for a motion.
Mr. Mayor, a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
A motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
A motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. No public hearing tonight, no old business. We'll jump into new business. The first item is the Winston Police Department body worn cameras. Neil, this starts off.
Yes, this is asking for a continuation of police body cameras for the next 4 years, 5 years, 5-year agreement. And I will turn it over to Chief Helt to give you specifics.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for having me. The Winston Police Department serves the citizens of Winston, and our primary responsibilities include life safety, protection of property, and crime prevention. In doing those duties, transparency is very important. In 2018, we researched body cameras for our officers, and in 2019, we began the program. It was a 5-year contract with Axon. Recently, I did reach out, to Axon and obtained a quote for extending the program we currently utilize, as well as adding a 7th camera. Currently, we have 6 cameras, and then adding an additional license to make it 8 licenses. So every operator has to have a license, and our part-time police secretary, Maddie, utilizes that to assist me in data request. So what you have in front of you is a quote from Axon in the amount of $44,859.70. That's 7 cameras, 8 licenses, all the hardware, software, equipment upgrades. There includes unlimited cloud storage on evidence.com. So everything that we record is maintained in the cloud under evidence.com, where we can get it from there, or send it to prosecuting attorneys. You'll see that it's different than in years past. So our last 5-year contract, there was a set amount every year for the cost. This contract, it's different each 5-year period. What was explained to me is that's due to inflation. So they incorporate that right away into their. Another important note is at 2.5 years and 5 years, we get an equipment upgrade. So at 2.5 years into this contract, we would get brand new cameras, brand new docking station, any other equipment that we would need, and then as well as 5 years. Currently, we have, well, I should go back. So our program, our body camera program, currently to this point has been funded specifically and exclusively out of our forfeiture fund. We had a considerable amount of money in our forfeiture fund, and that's unbudgeted that are just obtained through the criminal forfeiture, administrative forfeiture process. So the last 5 years of this body camera program were paid for through that fund. Currently, there's approximately $10,903.53 in that forfeiture fund. So I, Neil, city staff would recommend, if the council would like to move forward with extending and continuing with this body camera program, that those funds would be utilized first. And then the city has taken proactive steps in the preceding years to budget approximately, I believe it's $14,000 a year moving forward for body cameras each year. So then that would be paid for through the capital equipment. With that, this would go from 2024 to 2027, and then we would revisit the plan where it's at and where we would like it to go if the council wants to move forward. Any questions for me regarding our current program or where we're going?
I have a question. Tell me the value as far as, is it helpful for you? Helpful for the citizens?
Yep, that's a very good question. So to me, the camera is more valuable than any other equipment that I utilize. And what I mean by that is, it's, let's say you and I have an interaction, we're both going to have our different sides of how that interaction went, and this doesn't solve everything, but 98%, let's say, of that is right there. Everyone can see how that conversation went or interaction went. It's just so important. And it's not just for the officer. I mean, I'm a citizen of this community too, and I would expect my officers to have the equipment to, back up what I'm saying or doing as well. So I can't say enough how important it is for us.
Do you guys carry a red flag so you can see who's challenged?
A challenge. Yeah. There's a process for those issues.
Justin, how long is this data maintained?
Yep, great question. So there's different categories with this data, and with the data retention guidelines, as I'm sure everyone here is aware of how they work, but it's specific for law enforcement per state statute. So any evidentiary data, so that's a citation or arrest, is maintained for 7 years minimum. And then it goes from there. So use of force, any use of force, 5 years. Any deadly use of force or anything involving death is indefinite, so that's forever. That goes, now this isn't just body camera data, this is all data in totality. But there is general data. So general data is, let's say I go make a traffic stop on a vehicle, I issue a verbal warning, it's not adversarial, I did not use force, there's no complaint coming from it. 90 days, that data then can be deleted. But all data must be maintained for a minimum of 90 days.
Okay.
Did you, go ahead. No, go ahead.
How and when are they activated?
Yep. So if ours are not set up this way, but the counties, for instance, McLeod County has a signal in their holster. So if the gun is pulled out, all of our cameras get turned. We don't have that technology on ours, but if I just double tap this center button right here, it'll turn on. It's always on, but it's not recording. And it's hard to explain because right now if I tap it, it goes back 30 seconds. So whatever, the video goes back 30 seconds, not the audio. And it's just like our squad cameras. We've had that for a long time. So it's always on and ready. It's just when you hit that button, it goes back 30 seconds. So then also we turn the squad lights on. It goes on automatically. Or we manually do it. The handgun will do it. Those are the ways it's activated. Our policy is we almost always will activate it whenever we have any citizen contact. There are times, where somebody will just come up and, for the first minute or so you don't have it on, but we've had very good buy-in with the officers with it. Like with anything, there's a lot of hesitancy, I would say, going into this program, but the officers have found the value in it. It's such a great tool. But yeah, those are the different ways to do. We don't, like I said, we don't have the sensor in our holsters at this point. We did notice in January when we had one of our incidents in town, every time a firearm was pulled out of a holster, everyone's camera went off, because that's how Axon works. It's called a signal. So if a squad car goes through town that has the signal software, lights and sirens, all of our cameras go off. Which, I mean, it's a learning process. It just creates a lot of data. So.
Good.
There's cameras in the squads too.
Yep.
So when you flip the lights on, there's a camera pointing forward and.
Yep. So, and that's with our Axon, like our newest squad. We were supposed to have a squad last year, but going back to 2020 is our newest squad. It has the Axon camera in there. So there's a camera in the front, there's a camera in the passenger compartment in the back, and then this camera. And the great thing with this software is it links them all together. So all those files of the same event are all associated to the same incident, So I could send that to the attorney's office and they can view all those angles. So if I have 3 officers on one thing, all of that gets lumped together in the same case. They also have taser cameras. There's all different kinds of options out there. It all gets linked together, so it's all part of the same.
So that camera in the squad, is that included in this, or is that a separate fee?
That is a separate fee.
That contract's not up right now?
Correct. Yep. So the way that works is we pay the one-time equipment fee, and then the data we pay every year that fee. Unfortunately, we have a brand new camera sitting there for a year right now, waiting for a squad to come.
Justin, if you and I have an interaction.
Yep.
And it doesn't go well for me.
Yep.
And I want to request the data.
Yep.
Do you redact any of it?
Yeah. So, again, per state statute, you would be considered the data subject. Any law enforcement officer is always public data. So anything I do or say on the camera is always public. It can't be redacted. But if you are requesting that data, you can get that data. I have 2 forms you actually got to fill out. One's a data request for 13.82 form, and then a body camera form. Once you sign that, I can give you that, and anything pertaining to you, so anything you do or I do, is public. Now, let's say Councilmember Ebert comes into the picture at some point. All of his information, all the visible and audible parts of Mr. Ebert would have to be redacted because I don't have his consent to release that.
Who does that redacting?
We do. Madison Fiki does a lot of that, and I do. But it's a good point, though. And then the only thing I was going to hit on that as well is if it's like a pending investigation, we don't release any of that until it's gone through the court process. Now, we have a critical incident. There are some remedies in state statute that can, and you'll see metro agencies, unfortunately, have had to do this, where you release that sooner than you normally would to sort of lessen the impacts to the community. But yeah, the data subject is the big one. Like anything I or a law enforcement officer do, that's always going to be public. But that data is important to you, and you're protected per state statute, because the community also has, they see the camera on and they may be hesitant to talk to us, hesitant to come up to us. And I tell them, you should always feel like you're being recorded regardless. This is to protect you too.
Any other questions for Justin? Thank you.
Thank you.
Looking for a motion?
And make a motion to approve the purchase of 7 Axon Body 4 body-worn cameras, 8 licenses, hardware and software, equipment upgrades, and include a 5-year data plan and a contract for an amount not to exceed $44,859.70.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thanks,
Thank you.
Justin.
Thanks, Justin.
Organization report tonight is the Howard Lake Waverly Winston Schools just stepped up to the podium and have at it. Oh, time's up.
Oh, dear.
I told him 10 minutes, and he's got on here 15-minute presentation, it says.
Well,
Yeah.
I've got it down quick.
You should by now. Yeah.
Last night I got it down to about an 8-minute one. But Thanks for having me tonight. I am new to the area. My name is Nate Walbrook, new superintendent. However, I will say that depending on the outcome of the game tonight, I don't know if there's any Twins fans in the audience, I might change my name to Royce Lewis. But at any rate, I appreciate the time and the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about our upcoming referendum. Obviously, being new here, I'm trying to get acquainted with the history and previous actions. And I know that the district has gone out for an operating levy on a number of different occasions. And I want to talk through a little bit about why we're making the ask again, and how this time is different. Is it okay, Neil, if I just say next
Yep.
slide and we
Well,
go there?
whatever, I'll hit it.
Oh, perfect, great. So we've got four factors that are directly impacting the district's ability to maintain a balanced budget. The first one are the expiration of previous operating levies. The second is that state educational funding has not kept pace with inflation. The third is that COVID, or in the school world we called those ESSER funds, are all done and exhausted, and that there are unfunded or underfunded mandates like special education that continue to weigh on school district costs. Next, please. This is a chart that depicts area school districts operating levies, and then HLWWs is on the far left. Currently, we're collecting $0 for operations. The region average is $632 per pupil. It's important to note, obviously, we aren't collecting $632 per taxpayer, but rather that's the metric that schools use as it relates to operating levies. Next slide, please. This chart is the second part of the equation, which was inflation. The blue line on top represents had state funding kept pace with inflation starting in 2003, what the funding would look like for schools. And the yellow line is what the actual state funding is per pupil. This chart is the same chart regardless of the district that you're in across the state. And so you see in our current school year 2023 that there's a gap of a little over $1,200 per student. Had funding kept pace with inflation, HLWW schools would right now be receiving an additional $1.6 million in state funding and revenue. Districts around the state obviously have this exact same chart, and districts use operating levies to try and fill that gap between what we're receiving and then the inflation adjusted amount. Next slide, please. The third, if you recall, sorry, would you go back one more, Neil?
I can't see that.
Maybe. Right there. There you go.
Now what happened?
Thank you. Sorry. Go up to this. Yeah, there you go. Slide, show it. Sorry to be complicated. Over the previous couple of years, our last operating levy expired 2 years ago. We used to have two on the books. The last one expired 2 years ago for $50 per pupil, and the one before that was up around $500 a pupil, and that one expired about 3 years ago. HLWW has been using COVID or ESSER dollars to fund the gap so that we could maintain services and programs for students, especially during the pandemic, and our community members. But as I already mentioned, those funds are now exhausted. All right, now next slide.
Sure.
Yes, I'm sure this time. The last reason is unfunded or underfunded mandates, and special education is the poster child of this in schools. As you see on these charts, in last year, HLWW spent almost $2.6 million on special education funding, and we received from both state and federal sources about $1.8 million. We obviously, and for really good reasons, are legally required to provide services to disabled students and their families. There's no way around it. There's no cutting that program, and so before we pay any other bill, we pay our special education bill. And so the gap between $1.8 million and $2.6 million, that has to get paid before we pay anything else. And so before we decide on updating PE equipment or hiring another reading teacher or paying the light bill, we pay our special education bill because this is a mandate that is required by us. And we can't say, well, you are a student that has a disability and you're really expensive, and so we aren't going to teach you at HLWW. That's against the law. So special education is one of quite a few unfunded or underfunded mandates that these gaps weigh on the balance sheet. And like I said before, districts use operating levies to help fill these gaps because there's no way around doing these programs. Next slide, please. As time goes on, our revenues and our expenses end up impacting our overall budget. And as I've said, the gap continues to increase because of the 4 factors I've already described. The number one way that you test the health of a school district financially is by its fund balance or its savings account. And a fund balance is used in the school world to pay for unanticipated expenses. So for example, if one of our rooftop units or a couple of our rooftop units go down in the middle of January, we can't not repair that. It has to be repaired. And the cost of replacing our smallest rooftop unit presently is a little over $50,000 per unit. Those things get paid for by the fund balance because there's no way to anticipate when you're going to expend those. The other fun thing about school finance is our revenue streams. We don't know when we're going to receive revenue sometimes, especially when it comes to the federal government. Especially with special education funding, it is the rule of thumb that you are waiting 1 year for your special education revenue. And they don't tell you what month it's going to be in. They give you a quarter usually. That's usually in third quarter. But there's no way to guess when that happens. And in the interim, we still have to make payroll. We still have to keep the lights on and the heat going. And so we use our fund balance to help cover those costs until we get the revenue that we deserve. As time has gone on, and as we project into the future, HLWW's fund balance ends up going into the negative to the tune of negative $545,000 in the school year 26-27. The following school year, our fund balance drops into $1.6 million in the red. The distance between the revenues that we receive, the unfunded and underfunded mandates that we have, and the cuts that we could make is such that we can't cut our way to a balanced sheet. The needs are too dramatic, and the headwinds that I've already talked about are stepping on us to too great of a degree. Even, for example, if we cut every single activity, football, basketball, all of the drama, the musicals, every after-school event, that only gets us savings for 1 year. But the weight still remains, and we would still be in a negative, in the negative expenditure, or the negative, our revenues and our expenses would still be in the negative. And so I brought 2 of our board members here, Ms. Shannon Mulvihill and Mr. Brian Marketon, to talk a little bit about what would happen if everything was to stay the same and that these projections were to play out this way. In the year 26-27, the district would enter into a situation that's called statutory operating debt. So I'll yield a couple minutes for them to share about that.
Good evening, Shannon Mulvihill, and I am a board member of the HLWW School District. Thanks, Nate, for that. I think just a little bit about what I would say about SOD, which he just mentioned, is what happened.
Slide, Neil, sorry.
Sorry. Yes.
One more slide.
So SOD is statutory operating debt, and essentially, as you can see up there, what that means is that our fund balance would be less than or equal to a negative 2.5% of our overall expenditures. So that at that point, we have gone into the negative and no longer, not just no longer have a savings account, but are below where that is. I think, as we've talked about this stuff as a board, we try to kind of liken it to how we all live our lives, kind of everyday expenses. And I sort of think about it in terms of if you had no savings account and used your credit card for regular expenses that you had very frequently or any big expenses that you didn't expect, But school districts are not allowed to do that. And so what happens is when you're in statutory operating debt, the Department of Education essentially decides that you are no longer truly able to manage finances appropriately, and they come in and tell us what to do, and spend. I guarantee you, they're not going to spend the months and months on decision making that we do as a board in terms of prioritizing and really thinking through and thinking about what our communities value in our schools. And so SOD would stay in place really until those finances have stabilized. And so that's just a big reason that we think this is so important. And we're out here talking about it because we lose local control then. And local control really comes from local funding. And Brian, I'm not sure if you have anything you wanted to add?
Next slide, please. So this time around, we're asking for $600 per pupil. It's going to be one question on the ballot. This rate is also tied to the annual rate of inflation as measured by the CPI index. It's good for a period of 10 years. Next slide, please. If the referendum is approved, that still puts us in the lower third of operating levies in our region. And it also puts us below the average operating levy amount of $632 a pupil.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Back a slide. It's a 10-year levy, but the legislature did something this year that allows you to extend that for an additional 10 years without a vote. Is that correct?
Yeah, the legislature did add a provision to school boards that at the end of a levy expiring, at least an operating one, a school board can make a motion to renew without going back to voters for a referendum vote.
Could you explain to us what the thinking was there?
Well, I'm not in the legislature, so I couldn't necessarily guess, but I could anticipate one of the many issues is anticipating a continued, if you remember that blue and that yellow graph where the amount of funding the state is providing schools versus the amount of inflation adjusted aid, that gap continues to increase. My best guess is that the legislature anticipates that gap to continue well into the future or be exacerbated. And so I wouldn't speak to what was going on in the minds of the legislature, but I can imagine that knowing that that is the future, that they were attempting to try and make it easier for school districts and school boards to move forward with renewing an operating levy. So these are only for operating levies that are currently in place. So school districts still end up going to the voters, if that makes sense at all.
But this levy is a 10-year levy and potential of 20 years based on just a school board vote 10 years from now. Potential of another 10 years without the citizens having the ability to vote on it.
That could be a possibility.
Okay.
This is a $600 levy, adjusted annually for inflation. The next year it's going to be $650. Then the next year after that, $680 or whatever inflation comes up. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, I mean, I hope inflation isn't to the point where it would get adjusted to $650 in 1 year, but yes, it ends up getting adjusted annually to
So
inflation.
10 years from now, this could, instead of $600, this could be $900,000.
It could be. It also could be $500 or $300 as well. Yes. Yep. Whatever the CPI percentage is for that year, that's the alteration or the change that happens to the levy. Any other questions?
If this referendum would fail, when can you hold another referendum?
Right now, we can only hold them on election day, so that Tuesday in November. If your district is in statutory operating debt, you can hold an operating levy at any point in time.
What was the logic in not allowing citizens to vote in each community?
I'm sorry, this year, for this levy, there are polling places at each community. So there is one at, I think the mayor mentioned this during during the consent agenda, that one polling place is here at City Hall, another is at Howard Lake City Hall, and the third is at Waverly City Hall.
We just confirmed that today.
So did that change?
I don't know if it changed or not. I don't think it really changed, but we confirmed that. Okay, and so they couldn't use our equipment because of the county. So that's what we were waiting to see, if they could secure equipment, voting equipment, and they were able to.
Okay, good.
Special education, does that also encompass special needs children?
Yes, that's, the term from the federal government is special education. So any student that has a disability, whether that's other health impairment, like ADHD, and they need some additional help, all the way to a student that requires a colostomy bag and a feeding tube. All of those students they receive special education services. They qualify for those services through an evaluation process. And then based on the results of that evaluation process, the federal government has certain standards that a district must meet in order to provide services for that student or those students. And so in some cases, you're talking about a student who they have almost no accommodations beyond maybe they check in with a teacher once a week to go through their planner to make sure that they have all their assignments written down. And in that case, a student, if you imagine that bar chart of special education again, that student isn't necessarily running the district into a hole. You have other students who end up getting placed at a residential facility, and they are running the district $150,000 to $200,000 every year. And those students, because their families are located inside of our district boundaries, we are required to serve them.
How do the stats of special education measure up now versus pre-COVID versus 5 years ago versus 10 years ago?
That's a really good question. The trend over the past 15 years have been increasing numbers to special education. And the research is still out as to exactly why that's the case. For certain disabilities, most specifically autism, there has been a concerted advocacy movement nationwide to draw attention to autism and what its markers look like in students or in children that are really young, so that they can get the assistance they need as fast as possible. But then there's also, and autism is again a great example of this, where the screening tools that are used are significantly more sophisticated, and that autism ended up either being more prevalent in our society than people had ever realized, or that as humanity continues to grow and change, that autism is becoming a more pronounced part of our society. The story that I'm drawing out here with autism holds true for other disabilities as well. And so there is the largest disability category, which is learning disability, is split into two streams, if you will, generally, math or reading. And we have seen an uptick in reading LD, learning disabled students, over the past 5 years. And the state of Minnesota is looking to adjust its evaluation system, because the way that we evaluate reading specifically is that we end up saying, okay, well, Jesse is this and such years old, and he should be able to read at this level, but he's only reading at this level. And if that distance between where you should be and where you are at is at a certain amount, then you are designated as being learning disabled. The trend that we've seen across the state is that there are some students that have this distance and then some, but it isn't necessarily because of a disability. It's more because Jesse didn't get some of that beginning reading skills that are needed to build on to be successful in reading. And so the state of Minnesota over the coming years is going to be adjusting their evaluation process, but that has to get vetted by the federal government, and we continue to follow the current process until we're instructed to do otherwise. So, anyway.
And that's a bulk, I mean, of what you're saying is our reading and math, that's the student pool in special education right now in our district.
Yeah. Yep. Most students either qualify as being learning disabled, or we call it other health disabilities or other health impairments. And the most common one of that is like ADHD or ADD.
So out of a class of, just use 50 the number, how many of those students fall into special education service?
Great question. I'm going to warn, I'm more of a social studies guy, so I can work in tens. So if you had a class of 10, generally it'd be about 2.5 or 3 of those students would be receiving some type of special education service.
Do you have any transfer in with disabilities? I mean, from a different district?
Oh, like ones that are open enrolled?
Right.
Sometimes, yeah. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds on school law and such, but we definitely want to be known in the area as a district that takes students regardless of where they're at academically. Unfortunately, there are some districts, I'm not saying that there are any around here that are like that, but there are some districts that take advantage of loopholes and ambiguity in the law to look over a student, and if they determine that student's needs are too great, they find a reason to move them on to somewhere else. I am a firm believer that school districts exist to serve every kid, and if you need to be educated, if you need to be supported, the school district I work in will be there for you if no one else will be. Next slide, please, Neil. This chart shows the residential tax impact of the $600 per pupil rate. The average home value is around these parts about $300,000, and that equates to a $17 per month tax increase. Next slide, please. It's important to note that for operating levies, farmland is treated a little bit differently. If you were a farmer that owned 300 acres of land, the operating levy would only impact the 1 acre where your home and garage sit, and the other 299 acres would not be impacted at all by this levy. So with the money that the levy ends up generating, we are splitting it into 3 categories. Howard Lake Waverly Winstead continues to grow in terms of student population. So even though we aren't expanding or building any facilities with this levy money, we aren't allowed to, the funds are used to maintain and sustain that growth. So we remain committed to keeping students safe. And so the lion's share of the money will go towards hiring and retaining quality staff. As is the case for most industries nowadays, finding people who know what they're doing and are appropriately licensed is very difficult. And more than ever before in our nation's history, teachers have a choice of where they get to go. And it's important that we keep the best ones here and that we become a very attractive employer for them. In addition to that, I had also mentioned about our fund balance situation. So the bullet point that talks about stabilizing finances is we're going to make a plan for investing in our fund balance so that we can appropriately address unexpected expenses. For example, in previous years, our district has not had to really think much about facility upkeep and maintenance because the buildings are relatively new or they have been renovated. The renovations and the construction of the high school in 2009 that also impacted Winstead Elementary. And then also the construction of the middle school in 2013. But now, since these things are 2009, especially their mechanical systems are at the end of their lifespans. And so we continue to repair and put Band-Aids on things as long as we can, but there will come a moment where we will need to start replacing some of these units. The learning section is what we're here for. And so there is another unfunded mandate coming down called the READ Act, where we will be expected to adopt additional screening tools and reading curriculum and professional development for our teachers. And the state has already said that it won't be fully funded. And so part of the levy will go towards supporting the READ Act. In addition, we're offering credit recovery programs for senior high students that are falling behind in credits. And then increasing our learning interventions for students that are falling behind. The example I used using Jesse's name, that is part of our attempt to try and reduce the number of students that need special education services, is to intervene before they get too far down the line. The last one, and one that I'm really excited about, is bringing our communities together around our school. Believe it or not, the public school has a huge impact on all of the communities. And the services that we provide, for example, Holy Trinity, is a great partnership. And I do not look at Holy Trinity as a competitor of ours, rather a partner in helping our communities grow and helping our students become awesome. And so part of that is bringing everybody together and asking our community in a very deliberate and delicate way, what is it that you would want to see out of Howard Lake, Waverly, Winstead schools? What is most important to you? And bringing the feedback and the input of our community together, we're going to create a strategic plan that guides our decisions for the next 10 years. So, next slide, please. The vote is on November 7th. And as I said before, we'll have polling stations here, Howard Lake City Hall, Waverly City Hall. Early voting has already started, and that is available at the district office, the absentee ballot. And then early in-person voting is that week in October 22nd or 18th. But that's also at the district office. Additional information about all of this is on our website. There's a tab that's just called referendum. It has all the details of how to vote, where to vote, when to vote, and then all of the statistics I've shared here with you tonight, and a whole lot more. So there's also an option there that if you have some additional questions or concerns or something that needs to be clarified, my contact information is on there, and I feel like I've been doing a good job of getting back to people in a very quick manner. So, anything else, board members?
Just want to reiterate commitment to the strategic planning process. Really,
Could you tell us who's on the board now?
Absolutely. So we have these two school board members, Brian and Shanna. And then we have Ben Burrell and Michelle Hoyer and Kelsey Punchiker and Katie Koch. Is that 7? Oh, and sorry, Paul Bravender. Last but not least.
Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've come to the open forum section of the meeting. If anybody wants to address the council, step up to the podium, name and address.
Uh-oh. Here we go again.
I want to take this opportunity, if I'm not at the next council meeting, but beginning November 1st, our winter parking ban goes into place 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. We ask that anyone parking on the roads during that time, we believe it or not, we do allow it, but we do ask that you call us and ask for permission, and it's never an issue. With that, I just wanted to hit on the downtown parking. So between 2 a.m. 6 a.m. every day of the year, you cannot park downtown. So that's Main Avenue, 1st Street North, 2nd Street South. And again, we ask that all you have to do is call the police department, 320-485-2600, and it's never an issue. We'll give you permission as long as you ask. And we ask that you ask. So, thank you.
Yep, thanks. Thank you. Come to the city administrator announcements and updates.
I just have a couple here. We have the post office rededication that was planned for October 6th has been postponed. They do not have a makeup date yet. Airport lights. We were struck by lightning. So we have a claim in for those. And hopefully get those up and running, but they're about 4 weeks out, so if any of you are
Is that-
planning
is
on
that the
flying, you have
runway
limited
light?
use.
Okay.
Yep, runway lights. And then I was going to mention that the vote is November 7th here, or for our citizens, it's going to be at City Hall here. And, which also means our council meeting gets moved to the 8th.
Anybody have anything else? Otherwise, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Meeting
And the twins.
over.